Aliens could foresee every human move. One choice broke the future. The council chamber was already silent when Commander Yusra Malik walked in, and that silence had weight to it, not the polite silence of diplomacy. The silence of a room full of beings who already knew what she was going to say before she opened her mouth. She had been warned about this. Her briefing officer, Lieutenant Kara Nolan, had told her on the shuttle ride over. "They'll know your opening line," Kara had said, staring out the viewport at the dark between stars. "They might know your second one, too. Just go with it." Yusra had nodded like she understood. She hadn't understood. Not really. She understood now. There were 11 Veth delegates seated in a half-circle in front of her. Their species looked, at first glance, like something between a crane and a philosophy professor. Long-limbed, slow-moving, with eyes that caught light at angles that didn't quite make sense. The eldest of them, the one the Accord's files called Sarath, sat at the center. He had not moved since she entered. He was watching her the way a person watches a clock, patient, already knowing what comes next. "Commander Malik," he said. His voice translator produced something that sounded like wind through a narrow corridor. "You came here today to request expanded trade access for Earth's outer colonies. You also intended to raise the border displacement issue near the Cathari Passage. And before you leave, you will ask whether humanity might one day be considered for a seat on the Inner Accord." She stopped walking. He continued. "You will not ask that last question directly, of course. You'll build toward it through 3 layered points about humanity's growth and contribution. The first point concerns population. The second concerns resource management. The third will cite the Veth's own founding charter, specifically the phrase about civilizational readiness." Yusra stood there. She counted the ceiling panels. 17. "How?" she said. Sarath tilted his head in a way that might have been apologetic. "We have been observing your species for 212 years, Commander. We have behavioral data covering every major human decision across 6 generations. Political, military, cultural, personal." He folded his long fingers together. "You are, as a species, the most statistically consistent civilization we have ever catalogued." "Consistent," she repeated. "Predictable," he said, because he was not unkind, but he was not going to soften the word either. "Your species produces decisions the way your sun produces light, reliably, measurably, in patterns we can chart years in advance." One of the other delegates placed a small display on the table between them. It activated without anyone touching it. Lists scrolled up the surface. Human decisions, dates, outcomes. 200 years of them, catalogued with the same dry precision a librarian might use to file old newspapers. The Gulf War, the 2031 Climate Accords collapse, the Mars Constitution vote, First Contact Protocol, every single one marked, predicted, confirmed, filed. Yusra looked at the list. She looked at it for a long time. "You predicted all of these," she said. "Before they occurred, yes. Every one. To within margins, that in your own statistical tradition, you would call certainty." She thought about what Kara had said on the shuttle. She thought about the opening line she had prepared for this meeting, which she had not yet delivered, which Sarath had already told her. She thought about the 3 layered points she had organized on the flight over. "What is our accuracy rate?" she asked. 99.1%, Sarath said. "The remaining 0.9 accounts for what your species calls accidents, events with no decision maker. Even those, we can frequently anticipate by modeling environmental variables." He paused. "It is not an insult, Commander. Consistency is not a flaw. Predictability can be a form of trustworthiness. But it's why you haven't given us a seat on the Inner Accord." A pause. Not long, but long enough to tell her she was right. "It is one of several factors," Sarath said carefully. She sat down across from him without being invited to. He did not react. He had probably predicted that too. "Let me understand this correctly," she said. "You've spent 2 centuries watching us. You built models of us. Those models tell you what we're going to do before we do it. And the reason you feel comfortable letting us into this corner of the galaxy, trading with us, interacting with us, is because we are never going to surprise you." That is an accurate summary. We're not dangerous because we're known. Yes. And the Inner Accord, she said. Full membership, the treaty access, the technology exchange, the voice in decisions that affect our space. We'll never get that, because giving it to us would change our behavior in ways that might make us less predictable. Sarath said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. She breathed out through her nose, slowly, the kind of breath her grandmother had taught her to use when she wanted to say something she shouldn't. Her grandmother had called it the 2-second door. You stand at the door. You decide whether to open it. We are being managed, Yusra said. You are being included, Sarath said gently, within parameters that ensure stability for all parties. We are being kept, where the models say we'll stay. He did not deny it. She looked at the display on the table. All those dates, all those decisions, all those little checkboxes confirming that humanity had, once again, done exactly what was expected. Before you leave, Sarath said, I would like to give you something. He slid a data slate across the table. Small, gray, the Veth equivalent of plain packaging. What is this? She asked. The next 12 decisions your species will make, he said, over the following 18 months. We offer it as a courtesy. There is nothing in it you will find surprising. She looked at the slate. She didn't pick it up yet. Why are you showing me this? Because, he said, and something in his translated voice shifted in a way she couldn't name. You asked the right question just now. Most human delegates do not ask it. She picked up the slate. She tucked it under her arm. She stood up, and she had the overwhelming urge to say something that was not on the agenda, something that wasn't in any model, something that would make Sarath tilt his head at a different angle entirely. What came out instead was, "Thank you for your time." He nodded. "Safe travels, Commander." She walked out. On the shuttle back to the ISV Unbroken Thread, Kara Nolan asked how the meeting went. Yusra stared out the viewport at the dark. "Fine," she said. She opened the slate in her bunk that night. Alone. The ship quiet around her. The engine a low hum she had stopped hearing 3 years ago. She read the first entry. Confirmed it mentally. Yes, she had been planning that. Second entry. Yes. Already in motion. Third, fourth, fifth. By the 8th entry she stopped confirming them, and just read. Her chest had gone very quiet in the way it did, when something large was happening that her mind hadn't processed yet. The 12th entry. She read it twice. She put the slate face down on her bunk, and looked at the ceiling of her quarters. She had 7 ceiling panels. She counted them 3 times. Every single decision on that list was something she had already been planning to do. She lay there in the dark of deep space, with 200 years of her species' future, mapped out in a machine the size of her palm, and she thought about her grandmother's hands moving through steam in a kitchen that no longer existed, and she thought about a word Sarath had used. Consistent. She closed her eyes. She did not sleep. Yusra told no one, not Kara, who shared her morning coffee, and would have listened without judgment, not Captain Elliot Brine, who ran the Unbroken Thread with the calm competence of a man who had decided decades ago that the universe was strange and had simply made peace with that. Not Dr. Pyotr Volchak, the ship's chief science officer, who was 58 years old and had the specific energy of someone who found catastrophic information more interesting than frightening. She told no one. She filed her mission report at exactly 0600. She attended the debrief. She said the meeting was productive and the Veth were receptive, and there were several promising avenues for expanded trade access in the outer colony corridors. She ordered coffee. She went back to her quarters and stood in front of the mirror for a while. Then she ordered tea. It was a small thing, absurdly small. The galaxy's oldest civilization had just informed her that humanity was a species-scale puppet show, and her response was to switch her morning beverage. She knew how it looked. She knew that somewhere in a Veth database, a model had probably already accounted for mild beverage experimentation as a low-significance deviation event. But here was the thing about the tea. It tasted different. Not better, not worse. Different in the way that only things you chose for no particular reason can taste different. And Yusra Malik sat at her small desk with her tea going cold, and felt for the first time in recent memory like her own hands belonged to her. She lasted 6 days before she told Waldzak. He was in the science bay when she found him, surrounded by mineral samples from a survey run near the Cathari Passage, and a very large cup of something, that was technically coffee, only in the loose sense that it was hot and dark and kept him functional. He looked up when she came in and immediately closed the cabinet behind him, which was a habit he had developed after she had once reorganized his samples in alphabetical order as a joke. He had not fully recovered from this. She put the data slate on the table between his samples. He looked at it. He picked it up. He read. He put it back down. "How long have you had this?" he asked. 9 days. "And you're telling me now because?" "Because I've been staring at it for 9 days, and I need someone to tell me I'm not losing my mind." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him process it the way she had watched him process information for 3 years. He went still, and his eyes went slightly unfocused, and you could almost hear the gears. "All 12?" he said. "Everyone. Even the Cathari border recommendation?" "Which I had drafted 3 weeks before the meeting." He picked up the slate again and read the entries more slowly this time. She counted the mineral samples on the table while she waited. 43. He had labeled 31 of them. The remaining 12 had small sticky notes with question marks on them, which she found quietly charming. "Yusra," he said. He only used her first name when something mattered. "If the Veth can predict that you'd react to this information by trying to be unpredictable, they have already predicted the rebellion." She had known this. She had known it the night she read the slate. She had been hoping that saying it out loud to another person would somehow dismantle the logic, the way saying a bad dream out loud sometimes made it embarrassed enough to fall apart. It did not fall apart. "I know," she said. "So any plan you make to break the pattern is already in the pattern." "I know. Including this conversation." "I know, Pyotr." He set the slate down again. He picked up his coffee. He drank it. He made a face that suggested it had not improved. "Then the problem," he said slowly, "is not strategy. Because strategy is structured, and structured choices follow logic. And logic follows psychology, and psychology follows data. And they have 200 years of our data," Yusra said. "So," he put the cup down. He looked at her. "What do you do?" She didn't have an answer yet. That was why she had come to him. Waljak was the kind of mind that could sit with a question that had no answer, and not panic. She needed to be near that right now, because her own instinct was to do something, to act, to fix, and the act of doing something was exactly the trap. She went back to her quarters that night and opened the slate again. She scrolled past the 12 entries to a section she had not paid attention to the first time, a supplementary note added in Veth administrative script that Kara had translated for her in a different context, which she had recognized. It said, "Projected Behavioral Deviation Response, Month 3. Subject will attempt autonomy assertion behaviors. Estimated 34 micro-deviation events, all within normal variance. Trajectory unaffected. 34 micro-deviation events." They had named it. They had timed it. They had filed it. She closed the slate. She did not throw it against the wall, because she had the dim awareness that throwing it against the wall was probably entry 35. Instead, she went to her desk and looked at her pen collection. 12 pens. One from each planet or station she had visited in the past 4 years. A red one from New Karachi Station, with a slightly bent clip. A blue one from Veth Diplomatic Exchange that wrote extremely precisely, which she found funny, in a way she could not explain. One that had belonged to a Dreth trader, who had left it on a table and never come back for it. One her mother had sent her in a care package 3 years ago, a plain black ballpoint, not special at all, which she had kept anyway. She picked them up one by one and put them in the drawer. She closed the drawer. She looked at the closed drawer. She thought about Serath saying the word consistent in his wind-through-a-corridor voice, and she thought about all those checkboxes, and she thought about the fact that somewhere right now, a Veth model was watching her via whatever sensor array they had embedded in the diplomatic data exchange and logging her pen drawer incident as deviation event number 1, within normal variance, trajectory unaffected. The anger that came up was not hot. It was steady, familiar, the kind she had learned early to recognize as the feeling that kept her upright when things tried to knock her down. Her grandmother had called it, "your bones talking." She had a better name for it now, after years of commanding people through situations that wanted to hollow them out. It was the feeling of deciding. Not what to decide yet. just deciding to decide. She pulled the drawer open and took one pen back out. The plain black one her mother had sent. She uncapped it. She pulled a blank paper from the stack she kept for handwriting exercises, a habit she'd developed as a teenager and never dropped because it did something useful for her thinking. She wrote one question at the top of the page. What would an unpredictable choice feel like for a species that has never made one? She stared at it. She wrote nothing else. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket and went to bed, and for the first time in 10 days, she slept. In the morning, Earth Command called. Captain Brine took the briefing and passed the summary to her over breakfast. The Veth had extended a formal offer: full Inner Accord membership for humanity, expanded technology access, voting rights on Accord decisions affecting human space. A seat at the table they had been circling for 2 centuries. The catch was buried in paragraph 7 of the offer document, written in the particular style of language that meant it was the actual point. Humanity would be required, upon joining, to submit to full behavioral modeling disclosure. All government decisions above a certain threshold to be run through the Veth predictive framework before implementation, not as a condition of approval, just as a transparency measure, they said. Just a transparency measure. Yusra read it while her eggs went cold. Entry 12 on the data slate had read, Month 18, Humanity will decline Inner Accord membership offer. She was already going to recommend declining. She had been planning to draft that memo since before the offer arrived, because the offer had strings she could see from 3 sectors away. She closed the summary document. She sat with that. She sat with the fact that her most independently arrived at, gut level, this is wrong instinct, was item 12 on a list that Sareth had handed her like a courtesy printout. She pulled out the paper from her pocket. She read the question she had written. She thought about it for a long time. Then she went to find Walzak. She found him in the maintenance corridor near Section 7, the dead zone where a shielding malfunction created a 4-meter bubble of sensor static. He was there because she had told him, in their previous conversation, that she needed a place the Veth relay sensors could not reach. He was there because he had found it before she even asked him to find it. She was not sure whether that was remarkable, or whether it was just Walzak, who had an instinct for what the next step was going to be, before the next step announced itself. She told him about the offer. She told him about paragraph 7. She told him about entry 12. He nodded slowly. So they know we'll say no, he said. Yes. And saying no is exactly what they predicted, which means saying yes might be the unpredictable move. Except they also predicted we might arrive at that reasoning and say yes anyway, so we'd be saying yes to outsmart a model that already accounts for us trying to outsmart it. He thought about that. So we can't say yes, and we can't say no. We can't do anything that has a reason, she said. That's the conclusion I keep arriving at. Any decision with a logic behind it is traceable. Reasons follow values. Values follow psychology. Psychology is the thing they've been mapping for 200 years. He was quiet for a moment. The corridor hummed around them. Then what's left? He asked. She had been asking herself that for 10 days. She didn't have the answer yet, but she was starting to feel its shape. They worked in the maintenance corridor for 6 weeks. No documentation. No uplinks. Walzak had found 2 other people he trusted, Dr. Lena Osei, the ship's xenolinguistics specialist, who had the specific kind of mind that got very calm when the stakes got very high, and Sergeant Owen Dre, security, who had joined the conversation by accident when he heard enough of it through the corridor wall to understand what they were doing, and had said, very flatly, "Count me in." And that had been that. 4 people. A 4-meter bubble of sensor static. Ration bars that tasted like compressed apology. They were trying to design a choice that could not be predicted. The first 3 weeks were failure. Every option they generated got eliminated. Walzak would propose something, and within 10 minutes, one of them would trace the logic chain back to a value, and the value back to a psychological profile, and the profile back to data the Veth already had. They tried strategic options. They tried emotional ones. They tried moral sacrifices, symbolic gestures, diplomatic maneuvers, and at one point Owen suggested something so tactically wild that the room went quiet for a full 30 seconds, before Lena said, they'd have a model for that. It's categorized under desperate escalation, subsection 3. Owen looked deeply offended. I spent 2 weeks on that, he said. I know, Lena said. I'm sorry. How do they have a model for something I just invented? Because everything you just described follows from a specific combination of military training, threat perception, and resource scarcity anxiety. They've logged 600 examples from human history of people in your position arriving at something structurally identical. He ate his ration bar in silence after that. The ration bar was lemon-flavored, which was technically a positive attribute, but which, in the context of that corridor, felt deeply unkind. Yusra sat against the wall and listened and said very little during those 3 weeks. She was waiting for something to come clear. She had learned, over years of command, that there was a version of thinking that looked like doing nothing and was actually the most productive kind, the kind that happened in the spaces between. It came clear on a Tuesday. Walczak was talking about entropy, specifically about whether randomness could work, whether a purely arbitrary choice with no logical basis would register as outside the model's parameters. Lena had said no. Random is predictable. They model entropy. They know the statistical range of random behaviors for any given species. Our random is still human random. It fits in the box. Then we need something that isn't random, Owen said. But also isn't logical, Walczak said. Which is impossible, Owen said. Everything is either logical or random. Those are the two options. Yusra said, No, they're not. They looked at her. She had been staring at the wall for 40 minutes. There's a third thing, she said. Something that is neither logical nor random. That has a reason, but the reason doesn't follow from any value system or psychological profile, because the reason is completely, genuinely, cosmically specific to one person, one moment, one thing that cannot be generalized into a pattern because it is the opposite of a pattern. It is a single point. Walczak was very still. He got very still when something clicked. Give me an example, he said. She thought about the question she had written on the paper. What would an unpredictable choice feel like for a species that has never made one? She had been carrying that paper for 6 weeks. My grandmother, she said, used to make a dish called nihari. It's a stew, slow-cooked, heavily spiced, bones and broth. You eat it early in the morning, traditionally. She made it every Sunday of my childhood, in a pot she'd had since before I was born, and it never tasted quite right when anyone else made it. I tried. My mother tried. We had her recipe. We followed every step. It was never the same. Nobody said anything. I asked her once what the secret was. She was old by then. She thought about it for a while and then she said, patience. She said most people aren't patient enough, and that's why theirs never tastes right. She didn't mean it as a criticism. She just meant that the thing she put into it that nobody else could replicate was not a technique. It was not a spice. It was time. Her specific relationship with time. The way she stood at that stove. The way she waited. Lena was looking at her carefully. Yusra looked at Walczak. The Veth models are built on decisions, she said. Choices that come from values and psychology and historical patterns. But they can't model the specific inside of a person's life. They can't model what my grandmother smelled like, or what that kitchen sounded like on a Sunday morning, or what it meant to me when she said the word patience in a way that felt like she was handing me something. You want to send them a recipe, Walczak said. Not a question. I want to send Sarath my grandmother's recipe for nihari, Yusra said, handwritten, in Urdu, with the footnote about the patience and the marrow bones. No context, no diplomatic framing, no demand, no offer, no strategic purpose, just the recipe. Owen opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. That's insane, he said. Yes, Yusra said. In the best possible way, Lena said quietly. Walczak stood up. He walked to the far end of the 4-meter bubble and stood there with his back to them. She knew this pose. He was working through it at speed, turning it over, looking for the holes. He turned around. The Veth models are built on intent, he said. Every decision in their database has a purpose behind it. Even decisions that look irrational have a traceable purpose. Fear, anger, grief, love, all of those can be mapped. But this, he gestured vaguely at the air. This is not purposeless. It has a purpose. It is deeply personal. But the purpose is not transferable. It cannot be generalized. It belongs to one woman and one dead grandmother and one pot that no one else ever got right. There is no model for that, because you cannot build a model out of a sample size of one. One is not a pattern, Lena said. One is the opposite of a pattern, Waljak said. They'll run it through the models anyway, Owen said. Of course, Yusra said. And the models will fail, and that failure will propagate. Because their models aren't just about humanity, they're connected to the entire Accord's predictive framework. Every civilization that relies on the Veth projections to make their own decisions. If our trajectory goes blank, it doesn't just affect us. Owen was quiet for a moment. How long do we have before they can rebuild a model for us? We don't know, Yusra said. That's the point. She took the paper out of her pocket, the question she had written 6 weeks ago. She unfolded it and looked at it one more time. What would an unpredictable choice feel like for a species that has never made one? She thought it would feel like this: small, specific, slightly ridiculous. Not the dramatic final stand she had half imagined in those first sleepless nights. Not a battle or a speech or a grand refusal. Just a woman, sitting in a 4-meter bubble of sensor static in a maintenance corridor that smelled like recycled air and lemon ration bars, deciding to write down a recipe that her grandmother had taken most of a lifetime to learn. She borrowed Owen's pen because hers were in the drawer. She wrote for 20 minutes. The Urdu flowed out of her hands in a way that still surprised her when it happened, the way a language lives in the muscles differently than in the mind. She wrote the ingredients in the order her grandmother had assembled them. She wrote the technique as specifically as she could remember, which was very specific because she had watched it hundreds of times. She wrote the note about the marrow bones, and the note about patience, and then she added, because it was true, and because it cost her nothing to say it, that her grandmother had been a stubborn, difficult, magnificent woman who had survived things that would have ended other people, and that the Nihari was just the most obvious proof. She folded the paper. She looked at the 4 of them. If this works, Owen said, and I'm not saying it will, but if it does, what exactly happens next? I don't know, Yusra said. He waited for the rest of the sentence. There wasn't one. I don't know, she said again. And that's the first time I've been able to say that in 6 weeks, and actually mean it. She sent the communique that night. Encrypted diplomatic channel. Addressed directly to Sarath, with no subject line, no diplomatic credentials header, nothing that would tell the routing systems what category to file it under. Just a recipe. She went to bed. She did not count the ceiling panels. She learned later, much later, from a source inside the Accord's administrative structure, that the Veth ran her communique through their predictive framework 1,412 times over the following 48 hours. Every single run returned the same result. Classification: unknown. It was the first time in the history of the Inner Accord that a human communication had received that classification. It was the first time in the history of the Inner Accord that anything from humanity had received that classification. Sarath's response came 72 hours after she sent it. She was eating breakfast when Kara brought it to her. Kara had an expression she couldn't read, which was unusual, because Kara's face was usually a fairly honest document. She opened the response. It was 4 words. What is patient? She sat with that for a long time. The eggs went cold again. She did not notice. Then she pulled the plain black pen out of her pocket and she began, very carefully, to type. The first thing that broke was a trade negotiation between the Dreth Collective and the Kasari Union that had been in progress for 14 months. It broke because the Veth's predictive framework had told the Dreth that humanity would ratify a specific resource treaty in month 8 of the current cycle, and the Dreth had structured their entire offer to the Kasari around that assumption. And now month 8 had arrived, and humanity had not ratified the treaty because Yusra's message had introduced a classification error into humanity's behavioral thread, and the error had propagated upward into the projections for human resource policy. And suddenly the Dreth were negotiating with a spreadsheet that had a hole in it where the human variable used to be. They pulled out of talks. The Kasari rearmament index moved 3% in a direction that defense analysts described as concerning. A border moon near the Cathari Passage went dark for 6 hours. Nobody claimed responsibility. It came back online. Nobody explained why. Yusra watched all of this from the bridge of the unbroken thread, and felt something she had not expected to feel, which was guilt. Not crushing, paralyzing guilt. A steady, grounded guilt. The kind that comes from knowing you caused something and accepting that you caused it, which is different from the guilt that comes from pretending you didn't. She had known this would happen. She had not known the specifics, because she couldn't, because that was the point. But she had known that pulling one thread from a 200-year tapestry would not leave the rest of the tapestry intact. What she had not anticipated was the memes. Earth generated memes about the diplomatic crisis before the crisis had even peaked. Within 4 days of the story leaking through back channels to human news networks, there were 17 distinct meme formats in circulation. Most of them involved soup. 3 of them involved a recipe. 2 of them involved a grandmother, rendered in cartoon form, apparently descending from the sky above an alien council chamber, like a very small and very determined deity. The most popular one was simple. It was a photograph of a bowl of nihari, with the caption, "This bowl contains the downfall of a 200-year surveillance apparatus. Be patient." It had been shared 11 million times by the time Yusra saw it. She stared at it for a while. She sent it to Sarath. She did not explain it. He responded 6 hours later. "I do not understand this image. Is the bowl a weapon?" She wrote back, "No. It is funnier than a weapon." He was quiet for a long time after that. She had started to learn his silences. This one was the working through it silence, not the disapproving one. Then, "I am learning your vocabulary. I have learned 63 words this week." She wrote, "What was the hardest one?" He wrote, "Patient. I understood the definition immediately. The feeling of it is more difficult." She thought about her grandmother at the stove. The particular quality of stillness she had, the way she moved through the kitchen like time, was not something that threatened her. She wrote, "It is not the absence of hurry. It is the decision to trust that the thing you are waiting for is worth the wait." He did not respond immediately. She went back to the bridge. Captain Brine was there, standing with his arms folded, watching the sector display where the Cathari border situation was illustrated in the clean, abstract language of colored indicators. He had the look of a man who had decided that the universe was strange, and that this was merely another data point in a long series of confirming evidence. "Earth Command wants a call," he said. "I know. They're not angry exactly," he said. "I want to be accurate. Angry is not quite the right word. They are experiencing something that does not have a clean word. It is something like alarmed, and also extremely excited, and also slightly panicked, and also, I think, proud, which is making the other feelings worse." "How long have they known?" "Since yesterday. Someone at the Veth Diplomatic Liaison Office filed a report about the classification event, and it ended up on 3 different desks simultaneously. There were meetings." He paused. "There were a lot of meetings." She sat in the command chair. She looked at the sector display. The colored indicators blinked with the patient rhythm of systems that had been designed by people who believed information should be presented calmly, even when the information was not calm. "Piotr?" she said. Kara's voice came over the comm. "Medical bay, Commander. He's asking for you." The lights in the medical bay were the particular shade of white that Yusra associated with news she did not want to receive. She had been in enough of them to have developed that association without choosing to. The mind makes these connections automatically. It is one of the things it does without being asked. Waljak was in the second bed. He looked smaller than he did in the science bay, which she knew was a function of the bed and the angle and the lights, but which still registered somewhere below her thinking mind as information she did not like. He was conscious. His color was reasonable. The doctor, a young man named Felix Adeyemi, who had the specific calm of someone who had learned that patients trusted calm more than competence, though ideally you provided both, had told her in the corridor that it was his heart, that it had been making threats for some time, that it had now followed through on one of them, and that Waldzak would recover, but would not be cleared for space again. She sat beside the bed. "Don't make a face," Waljak said. "I'm not making a face. You are making the face you make when you're trying not to make a face," he said. "I've catalogued it. It involves your jaw." She made a deliberate effort with her jaw. "Better," he said. "Tell me what's happening." She told him about the Dreth, the Kasari, the border moon, the memes. The memes, he repeated. 11 million shares. He laughed, which turned briefly into something more uncomfortable, and she waited while he settled back. The bowl is a weapon, he said. I told him it was funnier than a weapon. It's both, Waljak said. That's the best kind. He looked at the ceiling. She noticed the light panels. 6 of them. What's next? Sarath is learning English. We're having a conversation. A real one? Slowly, she said. He asks questions. I try to answer them in ways that can't be compressed into a data point. Is that working? I don't know, she said. That's still the strangest thing. Not knowing. I keep reaching for the certainty, and it's not there. And then I remember that the absence of it is the whole point. He was quiet for a moment. She counted the light panels again. 6. Yusra, he said. Yes. If this goes badly, if the Accord votes to reclassify humanity, if the category they put us in is the one they put civilizations they've eventually decided to. I know, she said. I'm not saying it will, he said. I'm saying, if. I know, Pyotr. He reached out and took her wrist very briefly, and then let go, which was more than he usually did, because he was a man who expressed things through problems he was willing to help solve, rather than through contact. The shuttle bay smelled like coolant and departure. She stood at the door while the medical transport locked into the dock, and watched the procedures happen with the particular kind of attention you pay to ordinary things when the person involved is not ordinary to you. He gripped her wrist in the shuttle door before they took him through. He said something. She didn't catch it over the engine noise. She asked him to repeat it. He looked at her for a moment. Then he squeezed her wrist once and let go and went through the door. She stood there after the door closed. She counted the bolts on the shuttle door. 22. She went back to her quarters and sat at her desk and opened the channel to Sarath. He had sent another message while she was in the medical bay. It said, I have been told there will be an emergency session of the Inner Accord. The subject will be the reclassification of your species. The vote will happen in 6 days. She stared at that. He had added a second line. It said, Unknown is a classification we have not applied in 47 years. The last 3 times we applied it, the outcomes were not good. She understood what he was not saying, because she had read the Accord's history files. She knew what had happened to the last 3 civilizations that had been classified as unknown. She wrote back, Why are you telling me this? He was quiet for a long time. Then, because I have learned a new word. 59 words now. I am not certain I understand this one yet. She waited. He wrote, Fair. She closed the channel. She pulled the data slate out from where she had kept it, face down, for the past month. She turned it over. The projection section. The one that had listed 12 entries, all of which she had been planning before they were listed. She scrolled past them to the area beyond month 14. Blank. Not a loading error. Not a placeholder. Blank the way a page is blank before anything has been written on it. Her hands were steady. She put the slate down. She began to prepare for the most important vote in human history, and for the first time in 2 centuries, nobody in the galaxy could tell her how it was going to go. 6 days. She used them. Lena worked with her on the language, not the diplomatic language, the careful translated twice for cultural nuance language of Accord communications, the actual language, the kind that lives in the muscles rather than the dictionary. Lena had a gift for this, for finding the words that existed between the official words, and she sat with Yusra every morning for 4 days, and they talked about what they were actually trying to say, and how to say it without dressing it in armor. Owen ran security protocols and refused to sleep more than 4 hours a night, which she did not endorse but also understood, because there was a specific kind of competence that expressed itself as vigilance, and Owen had always been built that way. Kara handled the communications from Earth Command. There were many. Earth was alarmed and excited and panicked and proud, all at once, in the way Brian had described, and the result was a large volume of messages that communicated urgency without quite being able to settle on a direction. Kara sorted them into categories. She was very good at this. Yusra wrote a speech. It took her 2 days. She revised it 4 times. It was clear and structured, and built carefully toward a single point, and by the time she finished it, she was fairly certain it was the best speech she had ever written. She threw it away on the 5th day, because she had written it for the same reason everything she had ever done had been done, because it was logical, because it followed from her values, because it was the response that made sense given the situation, and a response that made sense given the situation was a response the Veth had already catalogued, filed, and predicted before she'd composed the opening line. Lena found her standing at the recycler with the speech in her hand. "Don't," Lena said. "It's good," Yusra said. "That's why I have to." Lena thought about that. She had a way of thinking that looked like patience, like she was standing at her grandmother's stove. "What are you going to say instead?" Lena asked. "I don't know yet. Is that a good sign or a bad sign? Last time I didn't know what I was going to do. I sent an alien civilization my grandmother's recipe and broke a 200-year predictive apparatus," Yusra said. "So I'm choosing to call it a good sign." She put the speech in the recycler. The accord chamber was larger than the one she had sat in 6 weeks ago. 47 species, every one of them represented by at least 2 delegates, most by more. The room had the architecture of importance, the kind of space that had been designed specifically to make the beings inside it aware that decisions made here would be visible from a great distance of time. She had counted the ceiling panels 3 times on the way to her seat. 41. The session opened with a summary presented by one of the Veth administrative delegates, a younger one, precise and thorough. The argument for reclassification was presented with the kind of clean logic that came from people who lived inside logic, the way Yusra lived inside air. It was not unfair. That was the hardest part. It was not unfair. Humanity had, through a single intentional act, introduced an unclassifiable variable into a framework that governed the stability of 47 civilizations. Unknown was not a punishment. It was a category. And the category had protocols. The protocols were not good for humanity. The arguments from other delegates varied. The Dreth were angry, which was understandable given the trade negotiation. The Kasari were measured and precise, and more alarming for it. Several of the smaller civilizations said nothing, which told Yusra that they were waiting to see which way the weight fell before they committed. 3 delegates spoke in humanity's defense. Their arguments were good. They were also, she could see, predictable. The Veth administrative delegate acknowledged each one courteously and then noted that all 3 had been accounted for in the pre-session modeling. There was a pause in the session. The chair, a Kasari delegate with the formal title of Session Arbiter, turned to her. "Commander Malik," he said, "do you have a statement for the record?" She stood up. She had not brought notes. She had the paper in her pocket, the one with the question on it, but she did not take it out. She thought about Waldzak in the medical bay. 6 light panels. The thing he had said that she hadn't caught. She thought about Owen counting his hours of sleep. She thought about Kara sorting messages into categories with the quiet efficiency of someone who believed that order was a form of care. She thought about Lena standing at the recycler saying don't. She thought about Sareth learning 63 words in a week, and asking what patient meant, and asking what fair meant, and still going on asking, still going on learning, 1 word at a time, across 200 years of certainty, into something he had never encountered before. She put her grandmother's recipe on the table. Physical print, ink on paper. She had printed it that morning on the ship's document printer, which produced something that looked faintly yellowed and specific, in a way that digital formats did not. She had folded it the way her grandmother folded things, which was a specific fold, bottom corner to top edge, at a slight diagonal, that she had never seen anyone else do, and could not have explained if asked. She unfolded it and placed it flat on the table. "This," she said, "is what you couldn't see coming." The chamber was quiet. Not a strategy, not a weapon, not a negotiation. A woman who taught me that the secret is in the marrow bones and you have to be patient, and that patience is not the absence of hurry. It is the decision to trust that the thing you are waiting for is worth the wait. She looked around the room. 47 species, hundreds of eyes, or the anatomical equivalents of eyes, or the sensory organs that did what eyes did. You built a model of us. You built it well. It was accurate. And then one morning, I sat in a maintenance corridor with 3 people I trust. And we asked a question we had never asked before. She paused. What would an unpredictable choice feel like, she said, for a species that has never made one? Nobody spoke. We found out that it feels exactly like this. Small, specific, slightly ridiculous. Not a dramatic gesture, not a defiance, but just something so particular to one person's life that it could not be generalized. My grandmother's hands, her pot, her Sunday mornings, the way she understood time. You cannot build a model from a sample size of one. She looked at the recipe on the table. You told us we were predictable. You were right. We were. And you managed us within that predictability. Carefully, thoughtfully, but completely. You decided what we could have and what we could not have, based on where the models said we'd stay. She let that sit for a moment. And we stayed there, for 200 years, because we didn't know, and now we do. She folded the recipe in her grandmother's fold. She put it back in her pocket. I am not asking you to trust us because we are safe, she said. I am not asking you to trust us because we have demonstrated stability, or because we've passed some threshold of civilizational maturity. I am asking you to consider the possibility that a species that can choose, once, to do something completely outside its own pattern, is not more dangerous. It is more alive. She looked at the Veth side of the chamber. We spent 200 years being consistent. We can spend the next 200 being interesting. And I think, if you are honest with yourselves, interesting is more useful to this accord than a species you can manage. She sat down. The chamber took a moment to be quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. The vote was called. She did not count how long it took. She counted other things. The number of lights overhead. The bolts on the chamber's lower panels. The number of delegates who looked at her before they cast their votes, versus the number who looked elsewhere. 31 looked at her. 16 looked elsewhere. The tally came in. She did not watch the tally screen. She watched Serath. He was at the end of the Veth delegation, last in the order because he was the most senior, and in the Veth tradition the most senior spoke last, and therefore carried the weight of considered judgment, rather than reactive impulse. He had been still for the entire session. She had not been able to read him. She had learned a great deal about Serath over the past 6 weeks, one word at a time, but she had not yet learned to read him the way she could read Waldzak or Kara or Owen, which meant she was sitting with genuine uncertainty about what he was going to do, and the genuine uncertainty was the most real feeling she had experienced in a very long time. He cast his vote. The chamber updated. Reclassification. Denied. She breathed. Just breathed. The breath her grandmother had taught her. The 2-second door. She stood at it. She did not need to open it. The session arbiter confirmed the result and closed the formal record, and the chamber began to do the thing that chambers do after important decisions, which was to become, immediately, a much more complicated social environment. She waited. Serath crossed the chamber to her. He moved with the unhurried deliberateness of a being who had never experienced a commute, and found the concept of one philosophically troubling. You voted against reclassification, she said. Yes. Why? He was quiet for a moment, not the working through it silence. Something else. I have been learning your vocabulary, he said. I have learned 67 words now. I learned a new one last week. She waited. Interesting, he said. She looked at him. I told the council, he said, that in 212 years of observing humanity, we have collected data, a great deal of data, and in 6 weeks of conversation with one human commander, I have learned more than the data contained. I told them that this discrepancy interested me, and they believed you? Some of them, he said. Some of them did not. The vote was close. I know. 47 civilizations, Commander, he said, with something in his translated voice that might, in another vocabulary, have been called weight. Their models are built on ours. What we begin now is not a small thing. No, she said, it's not. Do you know what comes next? No, she said. He was quiet. No, she said again, more clearly, because it was worth saying clearly. And that's the first time that's been true, for either of us. Something shifted in him. She could not name it. She did not need to. He said, I would like to learn more words. She said, I'll send you a list. 6 months later, The unbroken thread was on a new route, uncharted. The kind of space that had no models attached to it because no one had spent enough time there to build any. Lena was cataloging new data with the focused happiness of someone doing exactly what they were built for. Owen was running security drills with the focused seriousness of someone who had decided the universe was unpredictable and intended to be prepared for it. Kara was sorting communications, which now included a regular exchange with Serath's office that had grown into something that required its own filing category. Walzak was on Earth. She had spoken to him 3 days ago. He was recovering. He was consulting on a new xenolinguistics program that Lena had helped establish, and he was annoyed that he could not be present for the interesting parts in person, and he was doing the thing he had always done with annoying or difficult or interesting situations, which was find the part of them he could work on and work on it. He had said something at the end of the call, quietly, that she was fairly sure was the thing he had tried to say in the shuttle door. He had said, "I think she would have liked to know this story." She had understood immediately who he meant. She kept 12 pens on her desk now, different 12. One from a planet she had visited last month, one from a station she had passed through, one from Owen, who had given it to her without explanation, which was the most Owen-like gift she had ever received. One she had bought herself, for no particular reason, at a small supply depot near the Cathari Passage, a plain blue one, with no special properties whatsoever. The data slate was gone. She had walked to the ship's exterior access port on a Tuesday morning at exactly 06:01, and she had opened the port, and she had let the slate go into the dark. Not dramatically, not as a gesture, just because she was finished with it. She ordered tea that morning. She might order coffee tomorrow. She did not know. She thought about that on the bridge, with the uncharted route spreading ahead of the unbroken thread like a question that hadn't been asked yet, in a galaxy that had spent 200 years believing it knew every answer, and she thought about her grandmother's hands moving through steam, and a pot that no one else had ever gotten right, and a word that felt like being handed something by someone who had decided, long before Yusra was born, that the thing she was waiting for was worth the wait. Yusra Malik looked out at the dark. For the first time in 2 centuries of human history, nobody in the galaxy knew what she was going to do next. Neither did she. And it was the most alive she had ever felt.